Thank you very much for inviting us here this morning. We have a challenge ahead of us. We each have around about 475 photos. So trying to cut them down has been really hard because there's a message that goes with the whole thing. Okay, and we had to adopt the message in 8 days on the ground, and the pace with which it came at us, the sheer quantity of information we got, the sheer input from noise, people, dirt, smells, understanding what was going on in the church in Bangladesh has been huge. Yeah, Scotty's actually showing you how to put a lungi on, okay? So this has been the national dress for years and years and years. Interestingly, over the last 10 years, they're beginning to swap over to long trousers, but still the poorest people will wear a lungi. I was there when I was 12, 13, and 14 years old. My father was there, and that was a year after Bangladesh gained its liberation. So you are going to be taken on a journey at whistle-stop speed because we've been told we've got half an hour. When Scotty did this presentation, it took an hour and a half. When I did it at Ahoga, it took an hour and a quarter. We tried to pare it down for night church, and it took 3/4 of an hour. So please, will you forgive us if we go a little bit over? We will try very hard not to. But the point is, what we want to do is let you know what this is about and why we're doing what we're doing. One of the challenges is what we can show you is the things that happened to us, what things we saw. What our biggest challenge is now is to say, okay, what's beyond the material input? Lord, what are you saying to us as a church? What are we hearing the Spirit say to the church beyond the very, very, very obvious needs, multiple needs? Okay? Cool.
Alrighty, thanks Peter. When travelling, it is very crucial to have the valuable stuff safe and close at hand. One of the things in Bangladesh was there's this huge language barrier. So while there were many people that could speak English, there were a lot that couldn't. And just a quick story from the end of our trip. We're going to start our trip at the end of the trip. Was when we were dropped off at the airport while we were travelling around Dhaka city, where there's over 20 million people. We were in vans, and there were 12 of us in our group, and we had a driver assigned to our van. His name was John, and John had next to no English. And the whole time he drove us around the city, absolutely amazing. It is absolutely hectic over there. And we had our team in the van, and he could barely speak English. And when he dropped us off at the airport, before we got out of the van, he said to me, he said, "Oh, my heart, much pain that I can't talk more. Please pray for me and my family." And that just spoke to the enormity of the need that they have in Bangladesh for connection. That it's a nation with 180 million people in the size of the South Island, and it's 90% Muslim and just 0.5% Christian. And so the Baptist church over there is an even smaller percentage of that, and they feel incredibly isolated and just smothered by everything around them. So the fact that we were there was such an encouragement to them. One of the most important things that I kept in this handy bag was what I used to bridge the language gap and create connection between mostly children and people that we visited. A brown paper bag, and I've got my wee helper here with me. And in this bag, it may not look like it, but there is an invisible ball. And so I'm going to just grab this out and give it to Bella here. Right, just wait, Bella. Now you go stand over there. Just wait. All right, you ready? You throw it in the bag. Oh, and it's in the bag. If you want to hold this, I might throw it to one of you in the crowd, and you can throw it back into the bag. Andrew? Yep. You ready? In the bag. Oh, there it is. It bounces, and in the bag.
watching the delight on the children's faces when Scotty did this on a ferry was just awesome. So look, what we'd like to do is we'll just a wee bit of background. Why do we go? That's an important part. So the Baptist Missionary Society, now called Arotaki, invited 4 churches in New Zealand to go, 4 Baptist churches. The mission has been going on in Bangladesh for 138 years. We have 2 missionaries left. They're aged 68. They don't intend to retire because they don't believe in retirement. They say, we don't see it in the scriptures. We'll stay as long as our health permits. But if they leave, our mission finishes. Now, there were 4 churches who were involved in mission over in Bangladesh. One was the American Southern Baptists, the British Baptists, the Australian Baptists, and the New Zealand Baptists. And every single one of those has pulled out. And as Scotty shared that story at the beginning, when we said, what is your greatest wish from us? And they said, relationship. We value this more than anything because we are isolated, we're on our own. So we were sent in order to see what is happening and to try and discern the will of the Spirit for the Baptist denomination as a whole to some degree, because when we were one of 7 churches that began the BMS, you may have heard that before, Kerry's mentioned it. So the Baptist Missionary Society was put together 138 years ago, and we were one of the 7 churches that gathered to do that. And since that time, we don't believe we've had any association with Bangladesh. Yet the denomination at that time felt an incredibly strong call to Bangladesh and sent its first missionary that year. So for us, this was a real trip of, okay, God, what are you saying to us? What are you saying to us as a church? So let's head into some slides. I'm going to give you a wee bit of background. And for those listening online, you will, I'm afraid, miss the beautiful images of Scotty and me in our lungis from here on. But we'll just head to the slides, if that's okay. Sorry? That's a good idea. Let's start the slideshow. That's a really good idea. There we go. Will that help? Okay. So it was a reconnaissance trip, as I said, really, to go and see what's going on. So, heading it that way. Why are we not working? Nope. Okay. Here we go. So let me give you a little bit of history. So first of all, the history is the background to all of this. So before Bangladesh was Bangladesh, it was India. Before it was India, it was part of a much greater India. So for 3,000 years, until, when was it, 1757, India was a kind of a group of isolated states ruled by Rajas. The British came in, saw opportunity in terms of its minerals and various other resources, and so they annexed it as part of the empire, and they were there for 190 years. The infighting that happened between Bangladesh and the between the Muslims and the Hindus within India, eventually got too much for the British. And if you've ever seen the film Gandhi, you'll know that Gandhi had to face this and was looking to try and prevent it from going on. So just to cut the whole history down for you really briefly, essentially Britain created Pakistan into utterly isolated areas, and I'll show you a map in a minute that shows those 2 areas. The west was enormous, West Pakistan. The east was tiny over on this side. West spoke Urdu, east spoke Bangla, and the west decided that Urdu was going to be the national language of Pakistan. That created unrest. There was internal strife. Essentially, it ultimately led to a civil war where the West Pakistanis coming in to try and batter down the East Pakistanis. And after about 9 months of fighting, they appealed to India because it was clear they were going to lose. India came in, they won the war for them. So Bangladesh became a nation completely by surprise. The West Pakistanis had killed all of their intellectuals, all of the leaders in the country, all of the industry leaders. So they started a nation 52 years ago with nothing. Now, as I say, within the Baptist Church, we were there. What's our history there? 138 years ago we started. We sent a missionary over. Unfortunately, she died 6 years later of a tropical disease. And we have had people in Bangladesh for 138 years. So really, this is what I was talking about before. So just to give you a wee bit of an idea on the map, British India, you can see, that was what Britain essentially consolidated together and took over all the areas ruled by the Rajas. On the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, you'll see two little grey areas. One is West Pakistan and the other is East Pakistan. Okay, so that's what happened. And one of the challenges with that was that there were Muslims in all of India, and there were Hindus in all of India. So all of the Muslims suddenly rushed up to Pakistan because there had been this infighting going on for a long time. And they were frightened now with the major Muslim areas having been annexed out of India into another country. And the Hindus living in that area all rushed out. And over 3.1 million people died in a migration and in the wars that followed through that. It was a horrific time. However, I've removed some statistics in there, but going back to 1971, there were 68 million Muslims, people in Bangladesh, and now, as Scotty said, there are about 176, 178 million, okay? So it's the most phenomenal place. So these are just the areas we visited. I can't even point to them. So the one right, the circle right in the middle there, that is Dhaka city, which is a capital. It's the dongle that's missing. Scott, I'll get it in a minute when you're talking. Oh, you got it. Okay. That's cool. All right, thank you. So Dhaka's in the middle. Then we traveled a little bit further south to the orangey colored one. That's Chandpur. That was the second place a mission station was established. We traveled by train via Feni, which is further south and west and east, before heading upwards to Brahmanbaria. So Feni, the reason we went there is there's hostel there, a boys' hostel there for schooling. And then Brahmanbaria was where the very first mission was established. Okay, so that's our journey. That gives you a bit of an idea. To go from Dhaka to Chandpur was 3.5 hours on a ferry. To go from Chandpur to Feni was 3 hours. To go from Feni up to Brahmanbaria, about another 4 hours. Okay, so that was our trip.
Thanks, Peter. Oh, there's all his statistics. Here's a brief breakdown on the makeup of Bangladesh from a religious perspective. So as you can see, the Christians there are an absolute minority in a huge population. So day one when we arrived in Bangladesh, Ross and Cindy are the couple that have been there for 35 years, and they actually celebrated the anniversary while we were there, which was amazing. They now work for the Bangla government, establishing schools, because the schools that they established for the BMS were so successful, the government wanted them to model those and roll them out, which has provided great opportunity to slip in Christianity to the state school system. One way in which they've done that is that every day they have prayers in class, and they are okay with Christian prayers as long as they're equal. You have a Muslim prayer, a Christian prayer, and a Buddhist prayer. And once things are instituted in Bangladesh, they just carry on. It's just the way the system works. So Cindy picked a prayer for the Muslim prayer that was mostly aligned with Christianity, and that is said in Arabic, so nobody knows what it means. The Hindi prayer is said in Hindu, and she picked one that didn't contradict the Bible, and hardly anybody understands that. The Christian prayer is said in Bangla, and everybody understands it. And that's just the way it gets rolled out in all the schools now, which is absolutely fantastic. But because of their connections, even to get into the country, we had a special letter of invitation. In front of us in the customs line was a group of Chinese businessmen, and their interaction with the border staff was very confrontational and took a long time. As soon as our group got up to the immigration staff and they saw the letter, the way they treated us was so much more respectful, and they were very inviting, and everything got processed very quickly from that point onwards. So the connections that Ross and Cindy have built within the country are absolutely critical to being able to get in and operate effectively on the ground. So on the first day, after we arrived at about midnight, by the time we got back to our accommodation in Dakar City, I think the city alone, there's about 27 million people. In that area of Dakar, there's 40 million people, so it's incredibly densely populated. This is the YWCA, the building in the background there is where we stayed, and this is a school that they have in the front of the complex. It was probably the nicest accommodation we had the whole time we were there. There were proper flushing toilets and nice showers and all the rest of it. Yeah, these were our accommodations there. We peaked early, and then yeah. So the day after we got there, we got a nice late start in the morning. This is Ross and Cindy. They were our tour guides throughout our stay there. So the first place that we went and visited was the Bible College in Dakar City, and the Bible College caters to all the different branches of Christianity there, and they go up to master's level theology and equipping evangelists, and yeah, it was really cool to see how they operated in the middle of Dakar City. This was just some of the locals. The buses, there is not a straight panel on a bus anywhere in the city. This is a very good condition bus, and it's just busy. There's people absolutely everywhere. This is the Bible school, Bible college. So they have some computers there that students can use while they're there. They have a library where there's plenty of books that have been donated from New Zealand to equip that, and other denominations. We met the leader, the principal of the Bible school, and he was very, very onto it, very competent, and had a great vision for growing the Bible school and equipping local missionaries and people in the teaching of the Word of God. These are more photos of where we travelled. All the buildings over in Bangladesh, most of them are built with brick. One thing about Bangladesh, they don't have rocks. It's a funny thing, there's no rocks there. So if you want to build a road, you make bricks, you crush them up, and that's your aggregate for building roads. And they'll go up to 6 or 7 stories just with red bricks. They stack them all up and plaster them, and away they go. So that was a fun fact about that. At the YWCA where we were staying, on the second night we were there was a wedding celebration type thing, might have been pre-wedding thing. So this is some of the decorations that they had, and they partied till quite late, having a good old time. And day 2, Dakar, it was most of the day meeting people from different church leaders. As Peter said, it was just an information overload. There was just so many people to meet, so many things to see. It was like trying to drink from a fire hydrant the whole time. And that's why we are powering through. So from there, we then travelled to Chandpur, which is where Ross and Cindy live on their mission base, and I'll hand over to Peter to describe our time in Chandpur.
Try this again because I plugged the dongle in. It should be working, but let's try. Yeah, it is. Okay, good. One of the challenges, by the way, about one of the things about the Bible College Scott was speaking about is that they cater for every single denomination in Bangladesh. So it's not isolated to one. So there are Baptists. There are 3 denominations of Baptists. One started by the British, one the Americans, and one the Aussie New Zealanders, the Anzacs. There is an AOG church, there's Catholic church, there's Methodist church, etc., etc. And the Bible school teaches all of them, which is quite a challenge. The other big challenge is that they actually have to learn on computers in English, so they have to learn English. And the education, so the government education system doesn't teach people to learn well. However, I thought we'd just fling in a few extra slides just about the traffic in the place. If you think you're driving down a 2-lane road in New Zealand, this is automatically a 4-lane road in Bangladesh because cars just come wherever there is a space. So you drive with your right hand on the wheel, your left on the horn, and if there's a space, you just honk the horn and go. And even if there's a huge lorry coming behind you, you'll just assume it'll get out the way. This was the one form of public transport that we didn't actually, the top picture on the left is the one that we didn't travel on. It's called a rickshaw, cycle rickshaw. But it was just mess everywhere. This is an even better bus you see down at the bottom, in the middle picture at the bottom. That's just standard. I mean, why you'd ever put a new vehicle on the road there, I don't know. And on the right-hand side is just a picture of some of the wiring. If you're creating another floor in your building, you just find a convenient wire and you hook in, because why would you want to be a charge for your electricity? So there are birds' nests all over the place. Anyway, that was on our trip to the ferry port. So we arrive at the ferry port. We have the ferries, which are actually quite significantly large. And as we left port, there were about 7 already on the river. So the river takes you down from one place to another. Scotty was doing his paper bag trick on the river. It was absolutely beautiful to see the face of this little, what looked like an 8-year-old boy, but could well have been anything from 12 to 14, terribly malnourished, who made his living on the boats by begging. This was third-class travel. Fortunately, we weren't in it. We were up on the top decks with little cabins that could sit 6 people, because Ross and Cindy do that trip twice every week and refuse now to travel third class. They did at the beginning. And then we went out down the boat through the third class and up to the back of the boat where you see the stacks, the smokestacks. And what's being burnt in there could be just about anything. It might be coal, but it might also be coconut husks. It might be car tires. It might be anything. So pollution is a huge problem. And you can see this is a sunny day at this time of year, but it's completely overpolluted and crowded. These were some of the boats on the river, and the reason I selected these 2 on the left were because that is actually virtually the same boat. They were 2 different boats, obviously, but they're both doing the same thing. So these boats go up the river to collect soil, to come back down the river to put it on the land so that they can build on it. Because Bangladesh is just a flat delta. It's one of the reasons they don't have stones, is because every year it floods, the Ganges floods, and therefore they end up with new layers of silt. It's incredibly, incredibly fertile. So they're currently building all over their fertile land, which is part of their economy, but there's some bakshish going on in the background, backhanders, that actually get people building permission. However, this is a boat without soil. This is a boat with soil, and it's virtually in the water. The reason I put this one in on the right-hand side is these, between the 2 power pylons, you can see little stacks, 3 little stacks there on the land behind the boat. They are towers making the bricks. And the guy who owns these, they're all owned by one person. They operate for 5 months of the year, creating this incredible pollution behind. I don't know if you can see it. Just to the right of that right-hand tower there is a tiny little circle, which is the sun. It just cannot be seen. Now, this is a tropical country. If you know anything about tropical countries, that sun should be blaring at you, but the pollution is huge. The guy who owns those, by the way, has a private army and won't let anybody on board, which is probably because there are indentured workers there who will never get out. He'll flog them to death. Anyway, finally, we arrive in Chandpur. So this is the second mission station, and the mission house was built a number of years ago. Ross and Cindy have built the top story on there because the sun was so hot on the roof that they couldn't actually live upstairs during the summer season. So during the COVID pandemic, they built extras. Totally self-reliant for vegetables. They have their own vegetable garden. And this little pond, which is part of their land, is actually all part of the building process. That's why it's there. Because when you're in a place where there is enough land, you just dig out a huge lot of soil to put it on the land to build your house up above flood level. But of course, it's absolutely fantastic because they seed it every year with fish and it becomes a food source. Day 3, Scotty.
So while we were in Chandpur, because this is where Ross and Cindy were based, I think we spent 4 days there, and there were lots of little churches and schools all in the area that they've had influence in. One of the schools was an old prison that they converted into a school. Initially, the local council said, no, you can't do that. The buildings are not fit for purpose. Ross is an engineer, comes from an engineering background, and he said, actually, there's nothing wrong with these buildings. Put a bit of paint on them and we'll use them. 12 years later, and it's such a successful school that the government is now going to bowl one of the buildings and build a 6-story school there, which is really encouraging. And while the school is now funded by the government, the teachers there, probably 90% of the teachers there are Christian, second or third generation. So they have a great influence with the children and setting the tone of the environment that the children are learning in. So this is Chanpur here, as we've said before, and it lives off the river. This was our main form of transport. They call them autos. So it's an auto rickshaw. It's battery powered, and they hoon everywhere. So we split into different groups. There were 12 of us all together, so we split into groups of 3 or 4 and travelled out into the smaller villages. And we got to see the local schools in the villages, and where the NZBMS has donated laptops to help educate the local children there. The program that the children learn English from was written by a couple in Dunedin, and within that program they have incorporated video clips from the Jesus movie. So once they complete a unit of work, then they get to watch a wee video clip of the Jesus movie. So integrated with their English is the gospel story being shared on a daily basis, which is absolutely incredible. These are some of the local schools. So they have absolute bare basics, a school bag. They have probably 20 people in each class. These villages are very remote, and they're built from nothing. They're just little shacks in the middle of nowhere. There's ponds all around them that have been dug out, and there's just little pathways between huts and villages. There's no land that you can grow anything on. I couldn't see any means for making income or surviving at all. Some of the kids, they'll have effectively a cup of rice a day, or sometimes there's not even enough rice, so they have the starchy water that the rice was cooked in last time they had rice. So it's incredibly impoverished. In previous projects, there's been wells put in so that there's drinking water. This was a village that Peter went to, and there's a story behind the cow, and I don't know what the story is, so I'm going to get Peter to share about the cow.
Sorry. Yeah. So these were development projects. One of the things about the church there is that if you go out and do missions, you cannot just do the gospel story, because there are no agencies. If somebody has mental health issues, there's no mental health support to send them to. There is no wins for financial support. There are no kind of government people who will support you in any area whatsoever. So consequently, they take the gospel out as an holistic thing. They go out with this sense of, we come to bring abundant life. So they set up the schools, they set up development projects, they set up education in the areas, they teach the villagers why they shouldn't marry girls off at 12, etc., etc. And they also provide kind of micro-business opportunities as well. So these were 3 development projects that we saw. One was, the well digging. The other was an external kitchen. This lady who'd had this built had had her kitchen in her house, so all the smoke was filling her house up. And so they put it outside for her and showed her that the health in her house was better. And the cow was just a kind of micro-business thing. This poor little cow, big cow now, had been bought at a calf, never been anywhere except that stall. The 4 sides were all covered with Hessian cloth, but eventually it will be killed off and sold for meat. Yeah.
So on the missions compound where Ross and Cindy live, there's also a school and a boys' home. So this is the Chanpur boys' home. Very, very basic, but as far as infrastructure went, probably the best built boys' home that we visited. So there was more than one bathroom for them all to share. There was kind of one on every level. But still just absolutely bare minimum. There's hardly anything for them to do during the day. They had a couple of musical instruments, and other than the clothes that they have on their back, they pretty much have nothing. They sleep in these steel bunks. They were in all the boys' homes, and incredibly crowded, just one bunk next to each other, nowhere for any personal possessions or anything. But these here have all been built by Baptist missionaries that have gone over and funded these projects and partnered with the locals in the area. Pollution over there is just atrocious. The rubbish and everything, there's no thought of anything. When we travelled down to Chanpur on the boats, there's hundreds of these boats on the river, and each boat would probably take 1,000 people. And there are just hundreds and hundreds of these boats going up and down 24/7, and everybody just throws their rubbish straight off the boat into the water, plastic wrappers, everything. We had cabins, so we put our rubbish in the bin, and when we got to the port, the guy came along to clean out the cabins and just tipped it all into the river. And the river close to the cities is just like a black, oily soup. It's not really like water at all. And this we went down to, it's kind of like a wee port town on the side of the river in Chanpur, where they were maintaining their boats, building boats, repairing boats, and just seeing how some of the locals lived down there. These are the guys repairing their boats. This here is a bow drill, so it's a stick with a string on it, and the drill is in it, and they move it backwards and forwards. It makes it spin. They can drill holes and then poke these giant nails in, and then they cover the boats in tar. There's some locals there selling a favourite dish, a lot of curdled yogurts and milks and stuff, so they put them in these wee clay pots, and that's your local takeaway. This here, we went for a wee boat ride. It cost us 300 taka, which is the local currency, which is about $4.80 for an hour's hoon around the river. And it looked like it was probably a 12-year-old driving the boat single-handedly. So here we have, this is Mal and Mike from Dunedin City Baptist, and this guy here is Kenny, and he was one of our tour guides through the whole time that we were there. He ended up sharing a bit of his testimony with me, which was absolutely mind-blowing. The background that he came from of crime and all sorts of stuff there to where he is now. He had the most beautiful smile that would light up a room, and the kindest, most caring heart. He was just an absolute encouragement the whole time we were there. And this is us trying some local cuisine. I found a place that sold chicken burgers. And the rest of the team had us on that was not local cuisine. But later in the trip, we asked several of the school children what their favourite food were, and they said burgers, so I felt validated. One of the coolest parts of the trip was actually connecting with the other churches from New Zealand. Overseas mission has been such a central part of New Zealand Baptists, so to build those connections with the other churches again, it was really refreshing to hear what they had going on for overseas missions, and it was a key part of the trip, and what I see going forward is this opportunity to partner with other churches in the work that God has. Day 4, Peter.
So we'll try and speed up for you now because I'm aware of time. So you're about to be subjected to the kind of pressure that we were under, okay? So this is Chanpur. We just wanted to go out and see some of the tiny little rural areas. This is another auto taxi. It's one that actually took a few of us to church on Sunday. 4 of us went to a little local church, down tiny little roads, and you'll see it on the way back. That is right beside a power station. It was a Muslim area, but there was a church in there. This building here is a church. It is parked, the far end of it there is right there on the riverbank edge. So they're afraid that in the next floods it will wear away, because every year the land has been wearing away, and they think the church will collapse. Also, right outside, you can see Mel standing there, and there's this little building here on the right-hand side, which is actually this building here, which is a toilet. It was gross and disgusting, as many toilets are there. So this was inside the church building, and the pastor at the front actually lived on the Chandpur Mission compound, which is a rather lovely young guy, and just welcomed us enormously, as did the people who insisted that we had the chairs. So you see everybody else sitting on the floor. There were 19 there, including, I think, 6 of us with the interpreter. And the kind of barbed wire around there is the other side of that, is the electricity station. So we went on from there later in the day to a school. This was Chandpur School, and actually it can't have been the same day, because it would have been a Sunday. Oh yeah, no, would have been the same day, because of course in Bangladesh their day off is the Friday, because that's a Muslim day off. So school operates on a Sunday. So wherever we went, we were greeted with flowers thrown over us, with flowers given to us, a stem of flowers, and often with little cards. So these were some cards that they made for us, and a playground full of kids. This is the inside of a school, and we're going to show you 2 or 3 schools like this. You've seen one in a rural area. And one of those classrooms, by the way, in that rural film was a preschool class, where kids still sit at wooden desks on wooden benches and sit down and do what they're told. But these are government schools, all of them, and I mean, just there is nothing there. I mean, there are no shelves, there are no books, there's no storage for anything, there's no pictures on the walls, there's nothing to excite you, to create your imagination, hardly any windows. Windows are all on one side. But I really rather love the poster on the right-hand side, which was on the wall, which had the acronym teacher and all sorts of things that you have to be if you're a good teacher. So, for instance, under C, you have to be chaste, as well as creative, as well as competent, as well as a chieftain. And under T, you have to be tactful and temperate and trained. And I thought, okay, I'll print that one out and give it to Scotty, since he's starting his training shortly. Walking back through Chandpur later, again, the road just filled with auto taxis as people duck and dive, along with the motorcycles, the buses, the cars, the lot that's going on. All this river, that's the rubbish that's strewn around, will ultimately get picked up by these. These are the rubbish collection trucks, and they pick it all up and chuck it in the river, as Scotty said. And ultimately the river will feed into the Ganges. The Ganges will go out to sea. It is one of 6 major rivers in the world that produce 90% of the plastic pollution in our seas. So whilst we can make a difference, it's really education in these countries will make the difference. By the way, I was so excited when I got there. I started to remember, hello, sweetie. You're really nice. No, not a problem. I got excited because I started remembering my numbers. I'd learned 1 to 10 when I was there, or 1 to 9 when I was there, and I started to remember. So this one is actually 34, just so you know. Again, more pictures around the streets and a bit of traffic and what's going on. On the rickshaws, you take whatever you want to take. So you can take a whole family together with everything you're just taking to market. This looks like some kind of washing machine or tumble dryer or something being hitched on the back. The poor guy on the front gets no extra cash for this. You just negotiate a fee and off you go. And again, a little bird's nest kind of the electrics up in the ceiling. But you just walk down the streets and you duck and dive amongst the traffic as well. And it is remarkable that there are fewer accidents than there are.
All right, we're going to really start speeding up now. So we went from Chandpur to Feni, and then Feni to Brahmanbaria. That was a train trip. So here we went from here to here to here. In Feni, we stopped off and saw another boys' home. I got to lie down on the top bunk on one of the train carriages. It was an early morning start, and this was the breakfast food, some fried bread. Absolutely delicious. This was the boys' home in Feni and the local church there. It is extremely run down. It is one of the potential projects for expanding and renovating, but we can go into more detail later because we are moving. this is the same building, and yeah, it's really run down and bits falling off all over the place. Inside the building, all the bunks. So there's 50 boys that live in this boys' home, and once again, there's just absolutely nothing there, nothing for them to do. They have an extremely regimented day of schooling and time spent, but not very engaging. This is still Fenny. This is the school that they went to. So they stay in the boys' hostel and then they go to this. This is a public school there. This is our train ride and a picture. This must be from our hotel that we stayed in. It was a Muslim-run hotel, and on the day that we left, we went to go out of the building and found the door was locked. So we were up on the 4th floor, and turns out they'd locked us in overnight. So there was no way out. So I'm glad there wasn't a fire or anything. So eventually someone came and opened up for us. Bramanbaria, while we were there, this is probably the main mission base, where there's a huge hospital. They have, I think it's 150 nurses, and they all stay on site, so accommodation's provided for them, and then on top of the nurses they have the doctors and specialists. They carry out up to 17 C-sections per day. Bramanbaria is a city with 3.3 million people in it, so just a little town by their standards, but twice the size of Auckland. This is the only hospital in the whole city, and there's a birthing chair there. This is the operating theatre, so they have 2 tables, and there were some of the babies in a nice warm room. What funds the hospital, there's mission money that goes into it, but the main funding of the hospital is these private rooms. So the more wealthy locals pay absolute premium money for these rooms when they're staying there. They have a TV, a fridge, a spare bed, a couch, and that money subsidises the whole hospital, the medical training facility there. It also helps to subsidise the school that they have on site, where they have 1,500 students, and it helps subsidise the boys' home that's there as well. So it's an incredible asset to the city, and helps fund a lot of the activities in the area. It's very highly thought of amongst the Muslim population. They had riots a few years ago when the Indian Prime Minister came to visit Bangladesh, and there were just masses of people throughout the city. They burnt down the train station, they sacked the library, any public building was absolutely wrecked. Not a single stone was thrown over the fence of the mission compound, and it was very well looked after. This is more inside the facility, so they have a blood lab there. This is the waiting room with all the people waiting for treatment and care, and I think that's the part of the pharmacy. This is the school. So once again, this is Kenny with his absolute radiant smile. So this is a school where they have about 1,500 students. They have primary in the morning and secondary in the afternoon. We got to have a brilliant game of football on the field, and the talent of the players over there was absolutely amazing. It was such good fun, and that was one of the most positive interactions that we had with the local people and local children there. And the pastor of the church at Bramanbaria is also the football coach, and he was absolutely running rings around us, and it turns out he's 68 years old and just fit as a fiddle, and an awesome character, and had a brilliant relationship with these young guys. This is a local graveyard that we went to visit, and so there's a lot of missionaries from all over the world that are buried here, some from New Zealand, and there were quite clear themes of mission families that had been there for some time, inputting there. This was the boys' home. As far as potential projects, this one was possibly the one that I found most encouraging. The relationship that these guys had with the pastor, who was the coach, but also the hostel parents, was quite a different dynamic to the other boys' homes that we saw. And while the home was quite destitute and there was still a lack of anything, the way the boys engaged with us and the potential that we saw there, I think, was probably the greatest of the potential projects. So that's something that we can pray into about what we do in the future. This here is the boys' bathroom, so 50 boys, probably once a week or whatever. That's where they bath, and they all just line up and go through the bath and out. So yeah, just very, very basic and not much there at all. This is inside the boys' home. The whole place absolutely stunk. I think they had 1 or 2 bedwetters there, and there's just no way of washing or keeping up with the washing, so their mattresses just rot in their own excrement. So it's, and this is their local squatty potty that all the boys use. I think they had about 3 of them for that home. But once again, I see this as a great area that we could input, even if we could just get some waterproof mattresses for them that are easy to wipe down and keep clean, would increase the living standards there exponentially. So there's huge scope to help in a really practical way, but also to help with the teaching of English and higher education to help free these people from the poverty that they're in. A lot of the boys in these boys' homes, they come from an oppressed tribal group called the Tripura people, and they are kind of like the untouchable class equivalent. So they just have nothing, and they come from these tribal areas so that they can get schooling and education, and that's what the Baptist missions provide for them. This is the local church in Browanbaria. I'm pretty sure it was a Kiwi missionary that went over there. He ended up becoming mayor of the city, and for 6 months of his mayoral fund, he donated it to build this church. This is all the Christmas decorations. They leave the Christmas decorations up until Easter. I had the privilege of sharing a message at this church through a translator. So that was a first experience for me, going through a Bible message through a translator. But that was absolutely incredible and a great opportunity. I shared from Ephesians 4, which speaks about the unity that we have in Christ. We have one Christ, we have one baptism, one faith. And just sharing that connection with the local people was absolutely amazing. I'm going to hand over to Peter now. Go even faster.
Even faster still. Okay, Browanbaria back to Dhaka, 4-hour bus ride from, as you say, basically east to west, that way. We were all in minibuses during that. When we got there, we went to a school there called the Golgotha English Medium School. And we put these slides in because it is so different from the other schools you've seen. Whereas the other schools are kind of bare concrete blocks with nothing in them, no pictures on the walls, no nothing. And the kids, when you speak to them, you walk in the classrooms, they just stand up, and then you speak to them and they kind of freeze like rabbits in the headlights. They have no idea how to communicate. This school was established by Cindy, and there were 5 when they started, or 15 quite soon, and then now they're up to about 600. It is a Christian school in a church. It is a private school, but it's been so successful academically, the local politician has come and said, please, would you do this in the government schools? So she now has an opportunity to roll out her effectively, cautiously Christian education into government schools as well. But you'll see here, these are projects on the walls that the kids have done, and they stick them on the, on the doors, on the walls, on everything. These are the staircases that they walk up. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to make a school an inviting place. These are low-hanging fruit for us. We can head in there and do a whole bundle of things. And actually, in this one here on the right-hand side, the kids here are actually sharing about their project in a morning assembly that we were invited to take. When we walked into their classrooms, they were all over us. They were talking and saying, hello, how are you? What is your name? My name is so-and-so. What is your favorite food? What sport do you like? The communication was amazing, but their confidence and their ability to talk was fantastic. Government education is basically, I write on the blackboard, you copy it down, do what you're told. So they're not taught, they're not educated to think, they're not educated to reason or to experience or to understand or to dialogue. But at GEMS they are. It really is. It's a pretty special place, actually. And then day 8 we met up with Leo, who is He has the same kind of position in the Bangladeshi Baptist Church as, say, Charles does here. If you know Charles, our leader of the Baptist Church here. And so we didn't take any photos of that particular thing, but we went to visit another, one of their NGOs. Final day, final night, you know, some of our team, Scott included, I'll exclude myself from this, just couldn't help but have chips of the local kind or crud food from the local vendors outside, so that had to go in. And when we got to the airport, there just happened to be a platoon of Bangladeshis all going off on assignment to Afghanistan. So that was quite something. We sat with them for a while. And then, of course, when we get back to Dhaka, somebody insisted on taking this photo of the three of us in our hotel in Dhaka. But where to from here? Look, there are enormous challenges in Bangladesh. With the education being so regimented and so non-structured around thought, can you imagine what it's like to train pastors? They come out of this education system, and some of their congregations either have never had education, or even if they have, you preach a sermon, and an hour later you ask them what was the main point, they won't know. They're not taught in order to engage, all right? So there are heaps of things we can do here. Leadership development is a big one. And there are significant challenges. Evangelism has to be in three different types, and they do have evangelists. They train evangelists in the Baptist Church. But you've got to have one set to go to the Muslims, one set to go to the Hindus, and one set to go to the Buddhists. Because there are 91% Muslim, 8% Hindus, and 0.6% Buddhists, and Christians come in at the bottom here in the country. Good education is severely problematic. Government and NGO agencies, there aren't any, as I mentioned before. And the BBCF was set up by really conservative evangelicals, quite strong Calvinists. They've missed out completely on the charismatic renewal. Now, I don't know about you and how this strikes you, but in a country where you're 0.3 to 0.5% of the population faced with another entire religion that most of them have never heard the gospel, you're then faced with this thing of, well, how do we break in? How do we break in? And when I read the book of Acts, what I see is this apostolic move of the Spirit that takes out a wave of miracles and healing, and the word follows. And I honestly believe that this is the only way that Bangladesh will actually be reached in a very big way. So there are huge challenges, but there are also positives. I mean, RBC fundamentally involved in the starting off. The BBCF embrace wholeheartedly the mission of God to Bangladesh and their challenge to us. The BBCF, they love acronyms over there. This is the Bangladesh Baptist Church Fellowship. They've embraced the mission that God has given them. So while missionaries can come and go, hey, it's not convenient now, our kids have reached school age, we'll go, you know. They can't. And they've just said, we're not going to. God has given us this mission. They've given us this people. We're for them. We're going to go through them. So there's a huge degree of pressure, you know, of internal interest in this. Secondly, they are actually a very well-established church. Organizationally, they're very strong, probably too strong in one sense. They need the Spirit movement in there. But they are very strong. They are 300,000 in number in this denomination, the Baptists alone, and we're only 150,000 here in New Zealand. So they're double our size. So they're not a small church. They're not a kind of, oh, poor people, they need our help. This is a group we can work with collaboratively, and they want that relationship. So they're really keen on that. In terms of outreach and holistic discipleship, they've moved farther than we have. Because as a church, we do our church stuff, and when we want to do other stuff, we form a trust. They've embraced it all under one banner, which is, again, actually, if you read the book of Acts, it was very much about, well, look, you appoint people and you serve at tables. You actually look after the orphans and the widows. They've done this really, really well. They haven't carved things off. So they've got some stuff to teach us around this. Scotty and I feel very encouraged by what the Holy Spirit is doing over there. And we felt some really key messages came through to us from Ephesians and from the book of Numbers, one being that we are one body. So this is not us and them. It's not us being the real church and them being the poor ones that need our input. We are one body and we need them. Paul was categoric about that. You cannot say just, I have no need of the nose or the eye or the hand. We need them. So that was one thing. The other thing for me was this utter sense of overwhelm to begin with, until I remembered Numbers 8, where people went, you remember the spies were sent out by Moses, and they came back and said, look, we brought back some produce. The produce is fantastic. In other words, the pickings here are incredible. This is an unreached people group. There is so much opportunity to bring the gospel. Oh, but they're all grasshoppers in our eyes. You know, we were grasshoppers in our eyes, and they're all giants. We can't possibly do this. And then God spoke to me one morning and said, Peter, there is a pathway of oil here. I have been at work in this nation for years, and any light you bring must pour onto that pathway. I was so encouraged by that. And I love Joshua's response to all that was, of course we can take him. Come on, guys, let's go. So there are the challenges and the positives. But really, look, here, what are the opportunities for us? We haven't continued processing. We haven't made a recommendation yet to the elders because we're just still really settling with what God is saying. But there are 8 things here we can talk about as opportunities here. One is, yes, working with youth. Especially in the hostels. The hostels are independent from the schools. They're kind of like boarding houses that are outside the schools. And by the way, this is our last slide, so you can breathe a sigh of relief in a minute. But, you know, we can work with the young people there. There is so much to do. If we work with young people and teach them to think and build a Christian education into them, we're developing the next era of leaders, and we're developing the next era of pastors. It's a longer-term project, but it is something that we can really do with them. And there is so much opportunity in these hostels to get the kids after their government schooling, bring them back and produce maybe an hour or 2 hours of really solid, good Christian input and education that will expand their minds and their hearts. Really awesome. Building improvements to the hospitals. Oh boy, do they need them. And even just a coat of paint would be good, wouldn't it? Some of them actually need new buildings. Some of them actually need new stuff added on. We probably wouldn't do that work. It's much cheaper for the locals to do it, but we can provide the funding for that. One of the big challenges, though, with the hostels is that it's all funded externally because the villagers who send their children there to the cities to get an education have no money. So there is something else for us to look at there, and I've put it in, is developing local business. Because if we can actually help them develop local business that will self-fund, we're actually giving them the opportunity to, this becomes a sustainable project then. Right now, it's all externally funded, and you cannot get funds into Bangladesh unless you have an NGO, which we do. It's called Transend, but they're only allowed to remit funds twice every year. So if they're self-funding, what happens if the Bengali government suddenly decides to close down all missionary input? Right now, we walk out, none of these kids get an education. So developing some kind of business that will self-generate funds is important. Training at the CCTB, they're really keen for that. If anybody has some theological input and knowledge and wants to mentor a pastor, they'd be really keen to have online mentorship for their pastors going through that college. Even training, even running some of the courses from New Zealand via Zoom is something they would love as well. So online mentoring, as I said, teachers in the country mission, teachers as in-country missionaries. You know, for years and years and years, we kind of talked about missions equals overseas. And then we decided to redress that balance. We said, no, actually mission can be going to your person, you know, your neighbor next door. So now we say missions is your next door, your town, your city, it's all local. And as a church, we have to start thinking bigger than this again. Because the great commission that Jesus gave was go into all the world and make disciples. Not even converts. We disciple them into the kingdom. That's what Jesus did. He took 12 and discipled them into the kingdom. So teachers as in-country missionaries would be really helpful. Introducing the power of the Holy Spirit, they are cautiously open to this. So long as it's really biblically centered, they will buy into this. And to bring the move of the Spirit to them, to bring the authority of the Spirit. When I mentioned, you know, what about evangelism with healing, they just said, yes, this is something we need to know more about. They're open to this. So we as a church, actually, probably amongst the Baptists as a whole, apart from possibly Oxford, we are one of the foremost churches that actually embraces the move of the Spirit quite categorically and intentionally. And we've got something to offer as a church. Creating relationships with other NZ Baptist churches. Oh boy. As Scotty said, this was one of the really exciting things about being over there, was actually the interactions we had with 3 other churches, and finding that every single one of them either has or has sent missionaries over to Bangladesh in the past. And so for us, there's a sense we don't have to do it alone either. It's not just Rangiora Baptist Church doing our thing. We're part of a move of churches in this country wanting to embrace a move of churches in another country to support. So those are the kind of opportunities that we're thinking through at the present stage, just to keep you all in the loop and to bring you up to speed. And sorry, we have gone well over time.